Hi folks, this video is going to help you understand the steps of photosynthesis. So you should already have notes about the light reaction here and the dark reaction over here, but I'm going to add a few things about these two pictures to help you understand what's going on. So the first thing let's do is just talk about this simple little picture here, and this is summarizing the process of photosynthesis. So let's start with the first part. And the first part is that CO2, carbon dioxide, CO2 comes from the atmosphere and into the plant leaf. In addition to CO2, we need water. So here's our water right here. Water is going to fall to the ground and be taken up by the roots. Those are the two reactants for the chemical reaction. Now we need to talk about the products. So the hydrogen, as we talked about last class, is used to make more energy. And water makes energy when it's split. And the only time that that can happen is when the sun, here's our beautiful sun, colored orange, the energy from the sun hits our plant leaves and splits the water in half. When that happens, we have leftover oxygen. And the oxygen, the plant doesn't need all the oxygen it's making. And so we have oxygen as a waste product. So oxygen is going to leave the plant cell. So O2 is oxygen. And then our last part is going to be glucose. And glucose is what the plant is creating for energy. And glucose has the formula C6H12O6. And so it's kind of hard. Let me see if I can write it in a little pen over here. But the glucose stays in the plant cell, C6H12O6, stays in the plant cell and is used by the plant cell later. So for glucose, we need carbon dioxide that goes into the plant through the leaves from our atmosphere. We need water. Water comes from precipitation down into the roots and goes up until the leaf where it's being used. Water is split to make energy, and so the sun needs to be present to split water. When water is split, oxygen is a waste product, so it leaves the leaf and goes into the atmosphere, and our leftover product, what the plant's going to use, is glucose. So over here is a zoomed in picture of what's going on in the cell. So let's take a look at these different parts here. Hold on, my pen's not working. So first, down here, I'll start here. This is the stroma. This is the space within the chloroplast. That's the most inside spot. This arrow here is pointed to a thylakoid membrane. That's where photosynthesis actually happens. This line out, the outermost line out here, is the outer membrane. Then this one, I'm going to make it a little longer because I ran out of space. This is the inner membrane. And this here is the space in between the two membranes, and it's called the intermembrane space. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade in the thylakoid as green because this is where that pigment, chlorophyll, can actually be found. So we talked last class, the reason that the chloroplasts look green is because the green light's being reflected, but the red light and the blue light is actually being absorbed. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through the steps of photosynthesis we talked about yesterday, and we're going to look at the two parts. So I'm going to use pink for the light dependent reaction. Okay, so for the light dependent reaction to occur, what's going to happen is that the first step is that water is going to enter into the thylakoid membrane. When water's present in the thylakoid membrane, sun energy, I'm running out of place here. Sun energy is going to come in and it's going to split the water. It's going to split the water into hydrogen ions. We talked about that during Unit 2, that it has a charge, and oxygen gas. Also, we talked about during Unit 2 that when you break a bond like that holds hydrogen and oxygen together, energy is released. And energy is released in two ways. One molecule that helps store energy is called ATP. So we're going to show energy as ATP. And there's also another molecule called NADPH, and that's another form of energy that's also being released as well. What we don't want, though, is oxygen. That's our waste product. So oxygen is going to leave the chloroplast and leave the cell. Now, all that's left over are hydrogen ions, ATP, and NADPH. And that's the entire purpose of the light-dependent reaction. So now let's take a look at the light-independent reaction. I need a different color for this. I'm going to use purple. So purple, your page is probably going to look a little bit different because you already have notes on it, but I just want to spread this out so you understand a little bit better. Light independent reaction. So the light independent reaction is called that because it doesn't have to happen when the sun's out. And so it does not use the sun's energy. So if we take a look here, we've used water and we've made oxygen, but we have not used up carbon dioxide and we haven't made glucose yet. So what happens? What happens is ATP and NADPH are used in the light independent reaction. Carbon dioxide is brought into the chloroplast, so CO2, and ATP and NADPH. What happens then is this energy here, I'll start again so we know it's energy, adds carbon, so CO2 plus carbon, and it adds more and more carbon to the molecule until it has 6 carbons, C6H12O6, which is the formula for glucose. So carbon dioxide has carbon added to it, but it has to occur with ATP and NADPH there as energy to help form this bigger molecule called glucose. Glucose is the food of a plant. You and I get to go and eat a hamburger and French fries, and it's delicious. Plants can't do that, so they have to make their own food, so they make glucose. So let's look at this again real quick, starting with a light-dependent reaction. Water comes in through the roots into the chloroplast. When the sun is out, the sun's energy is strong enough that it splits the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen. When the bond holding water together is split, we get energy, and energy is released, and that energy is ATP and NADPH. We're going to use that later. We'll also use the hydrogen ions later as well, which we're not going to talk much about because that's a little more complicated than I want us to learn. Oxygen, though, is not needed, and so oxygen leaves the cell and goes back into the atmosphere. So in the light-independent reaction, that's when we make glucose. So carbon dioxide comes in through the leaves from the atmosphere. The ATP and NADPH are the energy that's used to stick more and more carbon atoms onto this carbon dioxide. And once the carbon dioxide has gotten a bunch of carbon added to it, it's turned into something called glucose, which is the food of the plant. And the formula, chemical formula for glucose is C6H12O6. So hopefully by the end of you listening to this little video, your paper looks a little more like this. Make sure to have all of this labeled. Make sure to label the arrows, and make sure to explain the light-dependent and light-independent reaction on your sheet. You may not have these arrows because they may get in the way of the notes you took last class. Okay? So when I see you guys next time, this sheet should be 100% filled out with this and the light independent and dependent reactions. Hope that helped. I'll see you next time.